A toddler disappears without a trace. Her father is found with his throat slit, lying in a pool of blood. The only clue, a child's pink blanket, stained red, and a white van caught on camera vanishing into the dark. Who would do this? And why? It was a modest home on the edge of Blairmore, a quiet mining town cradled between the Rocky Mountains, the kind of place where neighbors rarely locked their doors, where the past lingered in the smell of coal dust and the cracking of old floorboards. But that September morning in 2015, silence had weight. Not the calm kind, but a silence that pressed against the windows, heavy and unnatural. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was still, faintly metallic, the kind of smell that doesn't belong in a home with a toddler. The kitchen light was off, dishes untouched from the night before, toys scattered across the living room floor. But no footsteps, no laughter, no sounds of life. The bathroom door was half open, a shape on the floor, motionless, a body partially covered with a blanket. Blood had seeped into the tile grout. It traced the edges of the floor like water escaping a cracked basin. The throat had been slashed, clean but deep. A line so precise it could only mean one thing: intent. The face, pale and frozen in fear, belonged to a young man in his 20s. This was Terry Blanchette. His daughter, Hailey, 2 years old, was nowhere to be seen. There were smudges of blood on the doorknob to her room. A small pink blanket was stained. A doll lay face down beside the crib, one plastic arm missing. And then nothing. The child had vanished. Police arrived within the hour. What they encountered was not only a murder scene, but the terrifying vacuum of an abduction, one that defied any immediate motive. The father targeted with precision. The child taken. No forced entry, no sign of struggle beyond the targeted killing. The house itself told a story more terrifying than any eyewitness could. It whispered of premeditation. The layout of blood suggested Terry was attacked in his bedroom, then dragged into the bathroom where he died. Whoever did it had moved through the space with disturbing control. And most chilling of all, they had taken time. Enough to carry away a living child after killing her father, without rushing, without noise, without hesitation. This was no random act of violence. This was a surgical, deliberate intrusion. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew the house, knew when Terry would be alone, knew the routines, knew Hailey would be there. Blairmore was shaken, but not only by the brutality. It was the eerie precision that unsettled the town most. This wasn't a drug-fueled frenzy or a panicked burglary gone wrong. This was something else, something colder. Within hours, an Amber Alert was issued. Hailey's name echoed across radios, TV broadcasts, and digital billboards. Her face, soft, bright-eyed, innocent, became the focal point of a province-wide manhunt. From Alberta to British Columbia, even into Montana, the search spread, and with it, a creeping realization. The killer had vanished, and he had taken a child with him. Inside the house, forensic investigators found something else: bloody footprints near the back door, leading out, disappearing at the edge of the property, as if the killer had walked calmly away, carrying a toddler, leaving only horror behind. This was no ordinary murder scene. It was the beginning of something far more sinister, and no one, not even the most experienced investigators, could yet imagine the darkness that would soon unfold. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. The Amber Alert expanded rapidly, stretching across provinces like a net cast into the dark. In small towns and quiet rural highways, police checkpoints sprang up overnight. The name Hailey Dunbar-Blanchette was repeated with quiet urgency. 2 years old, missing after her father was found murdered, last seen in Blairmore, Alberta. To outsiders, it sounded like a tragic story, the kind that flickers on news broadcasts for a day or two before fading into background noise. But to the people of Blairmore this was a rupture. Nothing like this had ever happened here. And beneath the fear, something else began to take root. Doubt. Doubt that the town was as safe as it had always believed. Then came the van. A local business owner contacted the authorities. One of their company vehicles, a white van, had gone missing the same night Terry was killed. It hadn't been signed out. The keys weren't where they should have been. And, most disturbingly, the mileage showed it had been driven hundreds of kilometers, far more than any staff trip would require. That van belonged to Prestige Cleaners, a family-owned dry cleaning service that had served Blairmore for decades. The van was easily identifiable. It had an antenna mounted at the back with a small flag attached. Surveillance footage confirmed a van matching its description, speeding away from the area near Terry's house on the night of the murder. The business was run by the Saretzky family. The missing van was last logged in under the care of Larry Saretzky, but it was his son, Derek, who quietly returned to the shop the next morning. His arrival was unannounced, his demeanor distracted, and when asked about the Amber Alert, his words were chilling. "She's in heaven now," he said. There were no signs of distress in his voice, no urgency, just an offhand remark, spoken with a strange detachment. His father, disturbed by the response, notified the police. When officers arrived, Derek didn't resist. He sat quietly in the back of the patrol car, not asking why he was being taken in, not denying anything, almost as if he had been expecting it. Inside the van, blood was discovered. Not a trace, but substantial evidence, enough to match DNA. The seats were damp with cleaning solution, but poorly scrubbed. The floor mats had been removed, leaving behind only plastic flooring etched with partial footprints. Whatever happened in that van, it had been violent and messy. The search continued into Derek's apartment. Located near the family business, it was modest, cluttered, and strangely cold. Forensic teams moved through the rooms methodically. In the living room, they found latex gloves stained with blood, a pair of boots with dried fluid along the soles. A notebook lay open on the coffee table, its pages filled with erratic writing, fragmented phrases that mentioned names, symbols, and disconnected thoughts. One page read, "The baby is hideous. The dogs sleep. She is better off." On the kitchen counter sat a hammer. Next to it, a hatchet. Both had traces of blood, but it was the books scattered on his shelf that deepened the investigator's alarm. Volumes on ancient rituals, occult practices, and case studies on serial killers. The presence of this material wasn't evidence of guilt, but it offered context. A psychological profile began to form, one not of impulse, but of obsession. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was ritualistic, controlled. Derek hadn't lashed out in anger. He had moved with intention, driven by something internal, something consuming. He had planned, prepared, and when the time came, he acted without hesitation. In his interviews, Derek refused to speak in detail. His responses were vague, often incoherent, but the tone remained consistent, distant, unemotional, flat. Only one phrase seemed to repeat with any clarity. "The devil made me do it." Investigators, trained in the psychology of killers, had heard variations of that phrase before. It was not an excuse. It was often a delusion, a shield built by the mind to protect itself from the reality of its own actions. Whether Derek believed it or not was irrelevant. What mattered was that he had acted on it. As evidence mounted, one thing became clear. Hailey had never left Blairmore alive, and the man who had taken her hadn't fled the town. He had remained, walking among neighbors, returning to work, behaving almost normally. The mask he wore was not physical, but behavioral, and for a time it had worked. But every killer leaves traces, and Derek's were unraveling. The final discovery came not from high-tech surveillance or a sudden confession, but from a fire pit. Hidden on a ranch outside Blairmore, the pit sat blackened and quiet, surrounded by wide, open fields and encroaching silence. It belonged to relatives of Derek Saretzky, a shared family property often used for summer gatherings and bonfires. But something was wrong. A cousin, returning to the ranch days after the murder, noticed the smell first. It was faint, almost metallic, clinging to the air above the charred wood. As he approached, he saw bones. Small, fragile, out of place in a fire pit meant for brush and paper. He called the police. What they found confirmed what many feared but hadn't dared to speak aloud. Among the ashes, forensic teams recovered human remains, too small to belong to an adult, burned fragments of bone, a few teeth, enough, tragically, to identify the victim. Hailey Dunbar-Blanchette had not been taken far. She had been killed, mutilated, and set alight within days of her disappearance. The proximity of the site, both physically and emotionally, only deepened the horror. This wasn't the work of a stranger in the night. It was someone who had access, who had time, and who had returned to the scene with purpose. When Derek was confronted with the evidence, his demeanor shifted. He didn't deny. He didn't fight. But he didn't explain either. His responses remained fragmented, sometimes childlike, sometimes coldly analytical. He mentioned voices, a need for strength, a belief that killing would somehow save him or protect others. It was the language of delusion, perhaps, but built on the framework of reality. He had chosen the victim. He had chosen the moment. He had prepared. Psychological evaluations followed. Derek was examined for signs of psychosis, personality disorders, schizophrenia. But doctors determined he was fit to stand trial. He understood right from wrong. He understood consequences. Whatever compelled him, it wasn't confusion. It was conviction. Details began to surface during testimony. Derek had stalked Terry's home in the days leading up to the murder. He knew the layout. He waited for a train to pass before entering, using the sound to cover the noise of his approach. He carried tools, rope, a flashlight, a knife. He had imagined this moment more than once. The act itself, precise and unhurried, reflected planning, not panic. After killing Terry, he took Hailey, drove her in the stolen van to the ranch, and there, in isolation, carried out the rest of what he later called a sacrifice. It was not an act of rage. It was a ritual, one built on deeply disturbed beliefs, internalized over time, and eventually acted upon without resistance. He burned her body in the fire pit. Before doing so, he confessed to drinking her blood, to consuming part of her heart. Not as a symbolic gesture, but because he believed it would make him stronger, more capable. The act itself was ancient in its savagery, yet delivered in a tone as mundane as describing breakfast. That dissonance, between the horror of his actions and the emptiness of his voice, left a lasting scar on all who listened. The court proceedings were swift, but not easy. Evidence was overwhelming. The notebook recovered from his apartment referenced each victim. Hannah Mekatek, a 69-year-old woman found murdered days before Terry and Hailey, had lived near Derek, trusted him, allowed him into her home. Her death, Derek later admitted, had been a test run, a rehearsal for what came next. 3 murders, 2 children, one town forever changed. Derek Saretzky was sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 75 years, a rare and severe sentence by Canadian standards. But to those in the courtroom and to the families of the victims, no length of time could equal the loss. No verdict could restore what had been taken. Justice was served, but it felt incomplete, because some crimes leave no survivors, only witnesses. And yet, even in the silence that followed the trial, the questions remained. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs that had been missed? Was Derek always capable of this, or did something inside him break? There are no simple answers, only fragments, like the ones left in that fire pit, charred, quiet, and beyond repair.